So let's continue our discussion on solving general equation types. In this case, we're going to deal with some equations that contain fractions. And what we want to do is that in order to help us solve the equations that contain the fractions, we want to clear the denominators. What does that mean? In our case, in order to clear the denominators, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply by the least common denominator. So multiply, and I'm going to write this in, multiply both sides as a first step by the least common denominator. And I'll add to that least common denominator, the LCD, of all fractions on both sides of the equal sign. So let's look at some examples on what we mean by that. We have the fractions 1/3, 3/5, and 1/2 in this equation on both sides of the equation. So we look at our denominators of 3, 5, and 2 and look for the smallest number that all three will multiply into evenly. And we would find that the least common denominator of 3, 5, and 2 is 30. 3 times 5 is 15, and of course 15 times 2 would be 30. These are all prime numbers, so this is an easy one to find. They don't have any factors in common, so we're pretty well set. We just multiply each term on both sides of the equation by 30. So we're going to take 30 times 1/3 and 30 times 3/5 x. And on the right-hand side, take 30 times 1/2. So each term on both sides is multiplied by that LCD. Well, what's 30 times 1/3? Well, 30, remember, is the same as 30 over 1. 30 divides by 3 evenly just gives us 10. 30 times 3/5. Remember that 30 is the same thing as 30 over 1, and 30 is divisible by 5, which gives you 6. 6 times 3 is 18, so we're left with 18x. And that's equal to 30 times 1/2, which is 15. So now we've got a brand new equation, but this is sort of similar to the ones that we've been dealing with in the last presentation. So we subtract 10 from both sides to isolate our variable terms. Subtract 10 from both sides. We end up with negative 18x equals negative 5. And then we divide both sides by negative 18. So we divide by negative 18 on the left. We'll divide by negative 18 on the right. Now notice that 5 and 18 do not share a common factor, but since both the numerator and denominator are negative, we rewrite the fraction one more time and say that x is equal to the positive fraction 5/18, and this is our solution. We should make sure to check by substitution. I'm going to let that go for the moment. We'll come back. 2/5. Here's another example of all of this. 2/5 times x minus 1/4 equals 3/2. What's our least common denominator here? Well, it's not going to be directly 5 times 4 times 2, because that's going to give us 5 times 4, 20 times 2, 40. But there's a smaller number that 5, 4, and 2 all divide into evenly, and that number is 20. Notice that 5 times 4 is equal to 20. 5 times 2 is 10. And 10 also evenly divides into 20. So our least common denominator is 20. So let's multiply that on each term on both sides of the equation. So we're multiplying 20 times 2/5 x minus 20 times 1/4 equals 20 times 3/2. Well, what's going to happen right here? 20 times 2/5. Remember that 20 is the same as 20 over 1. 20 divided by 5 is 4. And of course, 4 times 2 is 8x. Minus 20 times 1/4. 20 is the same thing as 20 over 1. 20 divided by 4 is 5. Equals 20 times 3/2. 20 divided by 2 is 10. And 10 times 3 is 30. So now we've got a much easier example to work with. We add 5 to both sides. Add 5. Add 5. And we end up with 8x is equal to 35. Finally, divide both sides by 8 to isolate our variable x, and doing so gives us the fraction 35 over 8. That's our solution. That's what we wanted. We should make sure to check. Please do so as homework to verify that these are correct.